So before we get into the main segment, I just wanted to address a comment on my GHB video. And I'm not calling the person out because I've seen this same sentiment a great deal from the community at large, and I just wanted to talk about it. The statement tends to go, I just refuse to play against anyone on Skaven now. Insert whatever S tier thing is hot at the moment. I imagine it'll be Slaanesh very shortly as far as complaining goes. First, I'd like to unpack the difference between faction and army list. Actually, never mind, that's obvious. When talking heads like me whinge about OP armies, we're almost always talking about some hyper-specific list, and not the faction generally. And especially not pick-up games at the local store unless your locals are really competitive. And if they are, then you probably are. And a competitive person would want to practice against filth to find out what their weaknesses are and what your army can do, if anything, to exploit them. This also has to do with what kind of person you are. I don't play a particularly strong army in Beastclaw, but I find it really fascinating what the most OP lists can do, so I'm generally excited to play against them just to see what they got. I'm the kind of person who just really likes mechanics and interactions and seeing things play out on the table, even if I lose. Your mileage may vary. Let's put aside lopsided matchups like tuned competitive versus casual, as these should mostly never happen because you're both adults and can set up a proper game if you just use your words. Or sometimes round one of an event before Swiss sorts you out in the bracket with your peers. Players have plenty of opportunity to make subpar choices in list building, for a variety of reasons that often have nothing to do with skill. Lotan sucks so bad that his name was coined to mean cool looking model with garbage rules. But I'm going to play him in Deepkin anyway because I think he looks cool. This is especially the case for big books like LON and Stormcast. There is someone out there who runs a Drakesworn Temple Battalion, and there are Death players who run 12 Morghasts. I saw one at Gen Con. Then for soup books, this is the highest likelihood, even ones that are broken, like Skaven. The majority of Skaven armies you'll ever play against are probably 1,600 points of stuff I owned from Warhammer Fantasy Battle, plus a Vermin Lord and this new terrain they made me buy. Is the average unit in that book good? Yeah. But it's not trying as hard as it can to make sure you don't have any fun whatsoever. It's not turn 1 rat trap into chains, into warp lightning cannons and 80 plague monks. The average Scryer army probably doesn't even use clouds of acolytes with more warp power because they're fucking expensive. It's $15 for one. It's probably on a bunch of Storm Fiends and Doom Wheels, and so basically a gentleman and a scholar. The point here is not to make someone feel bad about picking the army they thought looked cool, and then happened to be OP. Look, if it's that guy from the store who net lists top tier stuff and then wrecks casuals with it, they know what they're doing, and giving them shit for it all the time is the correct response, as is pushing their shit in with your top list, because people like that tend to not actually be very good players, and they need someone else's broken list to feel superior to normal people. But I'm talking about new players here. My advice is to pretend it's Commander. You got your bullshit Tendrils deck when your opponent is packing heat or wants to test for an event, and you got your Wasatora Cat Dragon Tribal for funsies when your opponent is more beer and pretzels. It's all about figuring out what kind of game you each want to have. And to be honest, as a little secret, the average Age of Sigmar player is not playing optimally, and the average list is pretty flawed. It might not be as bad as you think. So I was talking to Vince on Saturday after his impromptu Warhammer Weekly with Paul Conti about the Open Day reveals, which you should watch, by the way. It was a good show. And we got to talking about the mysteries of the General's Handbook and the open reveals. Why was it so weird, so unfinished? Why Ironjaws? Why meeting engagements, etc.? I mean, the GHB was a rocky release, with lots of questions at the time, as well as 4 decisions that just didn't seem to make a lot of sense, even in hindsight. Why give IJ new rules when they were getting a book 2 weeks later? Why not Slaves to Darkness? Who will at some point, surely, but not right away. Everyone thought they'd be one of the reveals at Open Day until I summoned Cities of Sigmar and Ogres with meme magic. Sorry. Especially Slaves to Darkness players. I guess you haven't suffered enough. But all joking aside, we had a conversation and I think we've cracked the code, and I'd like to share it with you. What do you think about this as an explanation? Put on your tinfoil hats. Games Workshop is a business, with pipelines and departments. As such, things are put into motion well before releases, obviously. This takes even longer than most would like, because physical books take more time to create than digital products. You gotta print them off, after all. And sometimes China. As well, it's no secret that they are, broadly speaking, a bit understaffed, we'll say, for reasons that I don't know and don't pertain to this episode. But as you know, Games Workshop made it their official stance that all factions in AOS would get Battletomes by 2020. While this is long overdue, and the thing annoying talking heads online like me have been saying that they should have already done well before 2nd edition, I mean, it's the right thing to do, and it's great that they said they'd do it. Better late than never. Now, a company doesn't make an announcement like this unless they have scheduled everything out and made sure that it would be the case. You don't point your bat to left field and then strike out on something like this. Delaying any one book like Sylvaneth, even with a good excuse, the China thing, that sucks, but it's manageable. It's fine. But a campaign slogan like "Every army gets a book by 2020" is sort of the read my lips no new taxes of announcements. My point is they promised this having already made sure that their schedule could easily follow through, probably 6 months before the deadline, or more to account for China. And then they put a lot of people on it. So it's June 2018, the GHB is about to come out, and it's time to kick out these Battletome releases into overdrive. FEC and Skaven are on the way, Fyreslayers and Khorne probably just beginning. A few months later, work on the next GHB begins in earnest, and the call goes out for point suggestions from experts to see how to nerf the best armies, without shit-canning them like BCR and old KO. But also asking the teaming masses what they think, so the biggest negative play experience fires can be put out regardless of their source's effect on the meta. Fun takes precedence over tiers, after all, and I agree. As long as NPE doesn't get confused with just the feeling of losing, in general, it's fine. A few months later, GHB19 is underway, and so too is Cities of Sigmar and Orc War Clans. All the rules people are making sure the Battletomes are good. So why would you spend time and effort updating allegiances for Shattered Order factions when their book is coming out right after? Same with Bone Splitters. Aha, but what about Ironjaws? How do you get well-made and thoughtful allegiance rules in the GHB? Why not give it to STD? Well, Orc War Clans was in development at the same time. Ironjaws is probably the first faction the other team finished, and so they figured they'd just copy-paste that one into the GHB since it was done. But none of the others were, so the rest got the copy-pastement treatment from last year. The two work streams just happened to overlap on one faction. It's not that they picked IJ as a chosen one or said screw dispossessed, it was just serendipity. But what about all the other Allegiance copy pasta? Well, sometimes you have a current project, and it's going to be partially invalidated by a later release. But you run it anyway with a known defect. This was all those other factions getting 2018 copy pasta because Cities of Sigmar would fix everything. It would be fine. You'll have a short period of discomfort in between the two releases, but that's for marketing the smooth over. Because if you don't, and you just carry out the plan, then the optics at the time are going to look like zero effort GHB, then a new book 2 weeks later that makes the only thing you hit a home run on fully irrelevant. And worse, a waste of time instead of helping other factions now left in the dust. So we solved the mystery, I think. This explains everything. The GHB team was almost done, and the org team had only just started, and so they exchanged some rules. This would have been fine, but marketing fucked up real bad. I think we can lay it at their feet on this one. Instead of hinting at a future release to smooth over a bunch of factions getting dick all, they straight up said that the allegiances had expanded rules in the GHB, which was just a lie. Instead of hinting at an ogre book, we got just as fucking deadly. And for what? So open day could be more of a surprise? Half of the community not being upset to begin with probably splits the difference on that one, but who am I? So what about meeting engagements? Why make a half-baked 1K format when you needed to spend more time on points? I think they didn't know they needed to spend more time on points. Remember the community post that said Enlightened on Disc going up would make Bulgors more attractive? I think they honestly believed that. Most of them probably think Gorgon is a legitimately scary monster. Or if that playtester post on TGA a while back is true, they realize some stuff like Cygor, or for that matter Turtle and Black Coach, are so shit that their points would need to drop 100 or more to be playable. And then they decided it would just look bad if they dropped anything by that large of an amount. It would be a tacit admission of fucking up a war scroll so bad that just not doing anything at all was preferable. But I think getting more great models on the table is what's really preferable. There's always the danger of a race to the bottom, but then stop making shit war scrolls. If Cygor should cost 100, he should cost 100. That's just my opinion, though. So anyway, I think they really thought points were fine. Then cities, ogres, and war clans would take care of allegiances, and so they needed something in the book that wouldn't become irrelevant 3 weeks later when those Battletomes were announced. They needed a reason for someone to buy the GHB after the first month. This is something they've historically struggled with for General's Handbooks, if the endless online musing you've no doubt seen is any indication. Do I really need the GHB if the points are in the app is such a common question. Enter meeting engagements. A format that might become a surprise hit if they pushed it a little with marketing, could add some lasting content to the GHB. Run it at every GW event, encourage TOs to swap 1K for engagements, and boom, there you go. Now, as an aside, I think Warcry kind of invalidates meeting engagements anyway, but we're even more into opinion territory here. Even now, after a bunch of FAQs, engagements is still basically the rough draft of a good idea, but even if it came out pristine, Warcry is their 10 to 20 model stat squished skirmish AOS that plays quick. If you're already building 1,000 points and you have a whole evening, you might as well go to 2K and play a real game, but that's just me. Thanks for watching Tinfoil Hat Corner. Special thanks to Vince for our Sherlock Holmes adventure and my patrons who let me not work on a Sunday to make a tinfoil hat show instead. Looking forward to the new Ogre release and the next AOS cast, which will be a proper show. And that AOS cast will feature some Seraphon unit rundowns thanks to new Mournfang tier patron Erda. And any other request I get by then, but you'll have to compete with me getting really excited about Beastclaw. And we got 2 new battle tomes coming out with 100 factions. So yeah, future's looking pretty good. Thanks for watching.